You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Today is July 31st, 2017. My name is Lyle Balenquah, and I am a co-host of Heritage Voices podcast, along with Jessica Yanquinto. Today we are here with Susan Sekaquaptewa and Marissa Nuvayestewa, who are here to talk about the Hopivewat Learning Center and Museum project they are involved with the Hopi tribe. And with that, we'll go ahead and start with a quick introduction with both of you. Just who you are, where you're from, what you do, and then we'll kind of launch into it.
Nakuang talangwa nusikiakay manayan matiwa nupolvongwa nusipalavi ifkita fuma itapolvongyam put sitomovi yepe. Good morning, everyone. This is Susan Sekaquaptewa. My married name now is Susan Sekaquaptewa, though. That's how I'm known today. I'm Sekaquaptewa is my Hopi name, and I'm a member of the Butterfly Clan from Hopi, and I live at the village of Sekaquaptewa, where my father is from, but my family and clans from Sitomovi village in First Mesa.
Dalasan manayan Hopi matiwa Nuvayestewa tewa kita. Marissa Nuvayestewa from the Corn Clan and from the village of Tewa.
That's fine. Why don't you also talk about where you work at and what you do, just to give people a sense of that context.
Right now, I'm this is Susan. Right now, I work at the Hopi Foundation. I serve as the program director there at the foundation. I do a lot of other work outside of that, though. A founding member of the Hopi Food Co-op, very involved and engaged in the community food work there. Also did a lot of the Hopivewat project that we're going to talk about today in my volunteer time. I'm also a museum consultant and still do a little bit of that when I can, and just a gardener. That's what I love to do most, so that's part of how I spend my days.
Professionally, this is Marissa. Professionally, my title is Capacity Building Director over at the Hopi Foundation as well. I've been working there over the last 5 years. Prior to that, was doing work nationally in the field of philanthropy, native philanthropy. So my background comes from that arena as well, understanding or teaching tribes how to build their own foundations. And so my skills and knowledge in the field of native philanthropy is kind of what helps ground me in the work when I think about capacity building here locally on Hopi, and thinking out of the box about how we can invest as a people in our own strengths as a community, and taking that with infused with our cultural knowledge and teachings and the way we were brought up and taught by our elders about the importance of not forgetting about our culture and our language and how we do business today. So that kind of really is my guide in the work that I do today, and also a member of the food co-op. I think there's a lot of similarities that Susan and I have shared in our passions, and so we just support one another in that.
Cool. It listening to your descriptions of what you do and what you like to do, both professionally and personally, there's a lot of community involvement in what you're doing here. And so I think that's a really good place to start with in terms of where did this idea, what does Hopivewat mean? Maybe not just literally in the Hopi language, but what is the concept of it? And where did this idea of a museum / learning center / whatever else it's supposed to become, how did that come about, and where did your involvement begin? Let's start with Susan.
Sure. I was a first year out of undergrad school when I started working for the Hopi tribe at the Cultural Preservation Office. I received a planning degree, community planning degree at the time. Really wasn't sure what I wanted to do professionally, but wanted to commit to back to my community. I think every tribal person has that general goal in mind. So I moved back home and was at the preservation office, and that's when I learned about plans that the tribe had to build a cultural center / museum. And I had never seen or heard of these plans before that time. I just happened to run across them as I was doing research on other things in the office. So I saw blueprints and conceptual papers, and they even had job descriptions. And I was blown away because I really had no idea this was there. But it really inspired me to and excited me about the possibility of working in this place. And when I saw it, I was immediately drawn to it, and I said, that's where I want to work. That's what I want to do. Because before, I didn't really quite have a sense of where I was going to sit in the community. And so it wasn't built at the time. They were actually old drawings. They were like very old by then, 20 some years old. But I really believed that the tribe was going to build it at the time. And the first thing I thought of was, okay, well, who's gonna work in this place when it's built? And nobody I knew at the time was working in that kind of field. So I made a decision that year to go back to school and launch my path in the museum field. So I only worked at the Cultural Preservation Office 1 year, enrolled into a grad program in anthropology, and then start working and interning at museums. And that led me in a path of 16 years of been finalizing a graduate degree and that much experience in great museums across the country. I returned back home 16 years ago, and it still was sitting as a plan on the shelf. And so that's when I initiated it. But part of what I'm talking about is, I guess, reconnecting to your community, recommitting to your community. And then in the end is sometimes you're the one that has to build the idea, rebuild the idea, because the idea was 30 years old easily, or maybe 20 years old, 15 years old at the time. But now it's about 30, 35 years old. And I realized as I was doing research, there was a lot of people before me whose idea this was. People who are no longer here. They had reading some old documents and letters. There was great interest by our community to have something of this nature to support our community in cultural education, perhaps, in museum / collections work, exhibit work, and then also to support the tourism part of our community. It was originally designed to help do that as well. So it's a plan that I inherited or I heard of and became my plan and my vision. And we're now at the stage to try and make it a reality, because it still was still just an idea and a big vision at the time. So 2009 is when I jumped in and just decided, okay, what can we do about this if this is what we really want? If this is what I really want too, because it was just sitting as an idea for a long time.
When you mentioned some of that early museum work, like you came across a set of plans, where did that idea originate from? And during your research, how did you find out who kind of maybe was the starter or the innovator of actually going down the route of saying we're going to initiate this idea of a museum?
Unfortunately, we can't find some of those early documents, or I don't even know if it was documented. All we really found were the finalized plans of the conceptualization, the building plans, blueprints. So some of the real early ideas were not. We haven't been able to find any documentation. What I did find in some of my research was some letters written by Mr. Fred Cabody before the Hopi Cultural Center Museum was built. Which is another small independent nonprofit museum. But he was an artist. He worked for the Department of Interior. He was involved in a well-known artist actually across the country, a lot of connections, was connected to the American Indian Arts Institute in Santa Fe. And he just saw the many things. He was a real visionary. He saw the artistic quality of our community members here at Hopi. He was doing murals all over the place. He saw how we could make an impact in the arts field. And it was really, so that's the only research I found was Fred Cabody's letters of wanting to create a small place where we could support artists in our community. And he saw a museum based on his work with other museums as a way to do it. And so that actually was born. This very small Hopi museum that still exists today is there and still there barely. But the bigger tribal plans, we've never found documents. But there's conversations that we know of that took place by people who are gone now. They were people like LG and Josh Vetma. I don't know if you remember some of the names that we've been hearing. Marissa, Honani. There's a gentleman, Honani from Kipuxmon. So there's about 6 or 7 older elders. They're probably young men at the time who were supportive of a museum idea, and I don't know how connected they were to Fred's idea. They weren't artists per se; they were just elders in the community who envisioned. So, unfortunately, we don't have that research, though. Those are the questions we're asking ourselves. Like, where did this? Who really stemmed? Or how did this begin? But it's had many very life cycles, and then died out, and then revitalized and died out over the course of 30 years.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Somewhere out there is the holy grail of documentation, or somewhere someone has notes.
Garage,
Probably packed away.
Talking about this. So it always sounds like this idea of what this institution or whatever it's going to be has always been a community-based idea, and so it's really unique in that respect, in the sense that it's always been home-based. The idea has always been that Hopi has been looking for something from within its own communities to serve the people here at home, trying to balance that, that fine line of what do we preserve for ourselves and how do we go about doing that, but also how do we balance the outside interests of people coming in. So
correct, yes.
It's really neat to see that, or kind of get that understanding of where the museum idea came about and how you jumped in. And so how about you, Marissa? Where do you find yourself entering the game here?
Back in 2009, I believe Susan came to the foundation asking for some help and support in relaunching the idea of the museum. And so it was more of a formal introduction to supporting what Susan's efforts were at the time, in my role as the capacity building director for the Hopi Foundation. And later on, as it evolved, and my main role was helping to bring partners to the table that I knew that would be interested in supporting such an effort and helping to build that interest on the ground. Because during that time, I felt like any kind of new idea or even just the thought of building a cultural resource center for our community, it was important to involve as much community from the very beginning to support this effort, understanding that in terms of the state of our tribe during that time, there was really nobody that was pushing that effort. So coming from a tribal stance in terms of our governance, I knew that we had to build a team from the community to really support that effort and create buy-in with our own governance, with our tribe. So, that was really kind of the role that I played in supporting Susan and this idea. And then also looking at it from a community member as a mom, I really wanted to see something like this come to fruition for our future generations, and wanting to support that and inspire others that, we have the capability to build our own resources if that initiative isn't going to come directly from our tribal government. We as a community can take the lead in these same goals and objectives that was once part of a tribal effort, in the past. And so, I feel like that's the role that a nonprofit can play in the community, is to help bring other resources to the table to support initiatives like this. So, that was where my frame of thinking was, in terms of helping to develop local partnerships, but also develop relationships coming from the nonprofit sector that could be resources for us to help build some ground around and build momentum around this project.
You mentioned that you currently work as the capacity builder. What does that mean? What does your daily work kind of look like, and so people get a sense of how your work there, and we'll get back to Hopi Foundation's role in a broader sense, but how does your work as the capacity builder facilitate what Susan's ideas and what other folks have in terms of how a museum comes to fruition?
In relation to this project, my role as a capacity building director is really to kind of, and working for a nonprofit is really helping to build the sectors to come together, such as the business sector, our tribal government sector, and then the community. We're a huge asset within our own community, and we have a lot of people, and a lot of, I guess, when I look at the population that lives out here, we have a lot of cultural elders that and we know a lot about the culture. We have retired folks that are coming. Some of them are moving back home that have a lot of professional skills to contribute to something. So I look at the community as a whole, and look at ways that we can be innovative in bringing these folks to the table to support projects like this. And so when I look at externally into our community, that's what I see. I see the whole landscape and see how we could best utilize our resources to support one another. And I think that kind of thinking comes from, really, it's like something that we were always taught by our elders, is to be creative with the skills that we have and make best resources of the tools that we have, and apply it. And so, today, nowadays, they call it social entrepreneurship, or, being business smart. But, back in the 70s, or even before the 70s, our community was already doing that, being resourceful. And in relation to this project, I've seen a boost, looking historically back around the 70s, where people were moving back home who had gone away to boarding school, coming back home wanting to apply the skills that they had, opening up their own businesses, such as the co-op, where people were coming home wanting to make, jewelry, and make a living off of it. So, they were applying what skills they knew. And I feel like this project is kind of representative of that. We have the cultural knowledge. That's something that we don't have to build, but we have people that are ready to be plugged in. It's just building the facility to allow the space for those things to happen. And so, as in my role, that's where I come in to help connect those resources and make it happen. Internally, I do sort of similar type of technique, is working one-on-one with our staff to help build their skills, so that they can become better managers, helping them to experience their skill sets to really be able to leverage their own strengths too as individuals. And so I look at it as a contribution to investing into our human assets within our community. And so that's really kind of my role as the capacity building director, is to help build those skills and resources and partnerships to support our programs and help them grow.
Well, I think this is a good time to take our first break. So we'll go ahead and do that real quick. The rest of you, why don't you stay tuned, and we'll be right back with Susan and Marissa.
Hey, podcast fans, check out the ARC365 podcast at www.arcpodnet.com/ARC365. That's ARCH365 for your daily dose of archaeology. Each episode is less than 15 minutes long, and we have some great guests recording about awesome archaeology. We also try to throw in some definitions and basic archaeological information. So, check out the 365 Days of Archaeology podcast, only in 2017, at www.arcpodnet.com/ARC365 today. Find us also on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and Google Music by typing ARC365 into the search. Now back to the show.
Okay, we are back from our break. Let's go ahead and continue the interview here, and start off with another question. What were some of the early steps that you took, Susan, beyond research, when you decided that this is what you wanted to do and make it something of a lifelong project for you? Beyond that, once you made that leap, maybe shaking your head a little bit about it, but once you made that leap, what was kind of the first tangible steps that you undertook to get the momentum going?
Yeah, I'm sitting here laughing as you're talking about lifelong project. There's a couple people who've already said that this has been their lifelong project, and we're still where we're at. And it you know, I'm laughing, but it really is true. When I decided at however old I was, 21 or so, to do this, I didn't realize, you know, how long it would take. So wrapping your head around, well, at the time, I really didn't think I was going to be building it. So, you know, I thought I was going to be working it. And then another significant moment in time is when I returned back to the community. It still wasn't built, and I was still waiting for somebody to build it. You're right. I did make at some point I finally said, okay, well, like, who is going to do this? You know, when is it going to happen? Getting really frustrated about it, because up to this point I had just put my whole life experience, work experience and education into preparing for working in this place, realizing that, you know what, it's going to have to be me. If nobody else is going to do it, maybe it has to be me. And that's a big, scary moment in a young person's life. And so I think for those listening, you know, at some point it is you. You have to decide it is you that's going to take this and try and figure out and try and move it to the next step. And so once I kind of took a deep breath, I visited the Hopi Foundation as a means to try and help me figure out how to start this and, you know, where to go. And they were great at directing me to write my thoughts down, because all of this it's been in my head since I saw those plans in 94 or whenever that was. And so I was able to jot down kind of all the research, a summary of the research and where I thought we should go. And from that point on, that they recommended meeting Marissa, because I'm trained in museum work. That's the focus I bring to the table, and that's the experience I bring. And it's a limited experience in the end. And at the time, I thought that's really what it was going to just be, because I was familiar with the issues at the Hopi tribe, meaning we have 3 collections we're already managing. We have NAGPRA issues that the Cultural Preservation Office currently deals with. And there's a lot of need there that a traditional museum would help support. And that's really where I was coming from. But when Marissa and I was introduced to her, reintroduced as adults, because our families are old friends, we didn't work together up to that point, but she was one of the first persons at the table and brought a whole new perspective to this project. You know, pulling my lens back, because I was very focused on museum work, pulling it back to looking at it as a community project and what other things do we need. And so that was probably the real first step, was research, and then documenting kind of a paper, if you will, of all these ideas and thoughts of what it could be, and then starting to build a team. And Marissa was one of the first team members there to help, and a couple other people. Gloria Lamahavtiwa is a museum professional as well, and we'd sit down and talk every couple of years about how great this would be. And so I pulled her in at the beginning. And but this kind of project takes commitment. I mean, you think you commit to a board, or you commit to, you know, a few. I mean, there's a lot of commitments we can make, but it's been 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13. It's been 9 years since I sat down with Marissa. And a year before that, I was doing all the writing and research. And we've been researching since then, too. And I haven't gotten paid a dime for that work. So all of this is investment by you as a person, and a commitment to seeing something through. So there are times when I wanted to stop, pull out, and because it was just felt like it was going nowhere. So there's energy, and there's high points and low points, and it's a long process. So some of the next steps, I guess, was just to deciding, like, okay, what are those big areas that we need to continue to do? So we decided that we would start building connections to people and organizations whom we thought would be supportive and might be interested in helping. And the first question we get in the Hopi community when we talk about this project is, well, what are you doing about the Hopi Museum? Because there is an existing nonprofit independent Hopi Museum that's struggling. it's giving museums a bad name. You know how people go into museums and say, oh, they see the same thing over and over again. And it's expensive to turn things over. And so this museum, it's the same stuff they've had in there for years. And so that was, to me, the first place I thought we should start is working, bringing them to the table and saying, look at what we're doing, that you want to join us. We should all be working together because this is really a community project. So identifying early potential partners whom we thought would be interested in supporting this work and be mutually beneficial to them and helping them. So we started putting a presentation together of all this research we were doing. We started visiting a few villages, working with sharing this idea with nonprofits, just to really get the idea that, did you even know about this project, and this is what we like to do, and what do you think about it? Just real preliminary kind of presentations on the idea. That led to a lot of questions that we weren't ready to answer. I think we felt that everybody was interested in it, but they were asking us like, okay, well, where is it going to be built? And how big is it going to do? And what's going to be in it? And we're like, we think it could be this. We're not quite there at answering exactly that, but I was bringing my kind of museum perspective and all the tribal issues and challenges that this could support. I'd share that, and then we talk about, family dynamics and how this could support family learning. And so it was a huge, big vision that we were sharing with people. But we realized in a while that we needed to really understand what we were doing and pull back a little bit, because people wanted answers and we couldn't give them answers. So we recognized we were a little preliminary. But we wouldn't have known that until we started going out there. But from these presentations, we also began to get committed people who were willing to help us. And a few organizations or groups of people who were willing to really support it, and a few individuals who just were jazzed about what we were doing and wanted to help and be involved. And that's how we began to also build a team, having a lot of meetings, at least once a month. So we built partners with the Hopi Tribe Land Team, or Land Commission as they're known today. We built a partnership with the Hopi Development Corporation at the time. They had plans to build a museum, we learned, and so they were really interested in what we were doing. Those were probably our two big early champions. The Hopi Foundation gave us in-kind support to have meeting space and be sounding boards to our ideas and our process. And it was actually the Hopi Foundation as well that encouraged us to begin documenting how we're doing this work, because none of us set out to build this thing. And so how do you do it is the first question. We're like figuring this out as we go along. So a lot of things have been built in our community, but no one ever documents, or we don't know where that research is. So document what you're doing so others behind you can learn how to do this too, or you can share your experiences. So we did a lot of great research. I mean, it led from one point to another. And Marissa can share more. I think that I'm not remembering at the time, but one of the things that we did find out was that realized that we wanted to do was a lot of conversations about keeping this entity separate from the Hopi tribe. It would support the Hopi tribe, but it wouldn't be within the Hopi tribe. That we recognized the research we were doing, that the past efforts to build a museum they were funded heavily and supported heavily by the Hopi tribe, but they also were not fully seen because of issues of the tribe, mainly politics and administrative leadership turnover. And we recognize that this needs to stay here for a long time. Once it's up, we need to be able to keep it safe from those types of risks and impacts. So some early decisions, we decided it was going to be separate, but we didn't know how separate and what connection it was going to be. So one of the first things we did was do some nonprofit research on what kind of nonprofit it was going to be. Most museums are nonprofits in the country, and so we just identified things like that we needed to learn more about, and then make some informed decisions on the next steps. And that would lead to more questions, so we go down and do more research. And so it's been slow but steady pace. And I don't know if Marissa wants to add any more to that's how it got started 9 years ago.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I have to add is just what Susan just described is really just, launching the idea. And it was an already existing idea, so it's kind of like reintroducing it into the community and to the partners about, hey, we have this great plan here, and we want as community members to be able to make it become a reality. And so a lot of the initial work was about building awareness again of that idea and the plan of the tribe, and just kind of getting their perspectives on what they thought about that, because it's a new generation that we're speaking to in terms of the audience, new leadership. Would they be on board or not? If this idea is still true today, that it's something that's a real great need, who's on board to support. And that was kind of initially why we started doing these presentations, was just to get a feel for that, get a feel for if we really would have community support around this, and who'd be willing to assist us in going forward with it. And so, and then also to hear others' perspectives about what they feel our community needs, because we did talk about the vision. For me, I feel the vision is broader than the concept of a museum. Coming to it from a cultural community member here, I really value the culture that we have. I feel like we're not making best use of the knowledge that we could be in the manner that will benefit the youth and future generations. So I feel like in this day and age, I actually really broadened that vision to look at it from how can we as a community come together to make some real sound decisions about how we want to build and strengthen our cultural assets within our own community. Because we have our culture, we have our ceremonies that we that support that, but in a way that society that we exist in this society today, how can we use that same knowledge to help guide our decisions into the future? And I felt like this would be a platform to delve deep into those kind of conversations, and to be able to create policy that helps to further that. Because right now at the tribal level, we don't have, a policy that says, every school should have Hopi Lawai as, at the forefront of their curriculum. Some basic decisions like that, I think, could be made to be able to benefit everyone. And so I felt like this, the idea or the vision could be inclusive of how we want to responsibly manage our own assets in our community, and it be a space where people can come together to share their ideas about that. And so it's really, the whole early, back in 2000s, the early stages was really kind of building awareness, gaining support, and hearing back from other people what their thoughts and ideas were about this same vision. And so I feel like now that we've gotten to the point to where we're at now, we actually have committed folks that are really wanting to drive this project to the next level, which is really, becoming institutionalizing it. So applying for the status of a nonprofit, establishing a board. So now we're actually, at that stage where we're working on the policies that's going to help to guide our decision making going forward with this project.
Let me make one more point that I think is key to understanding those early years. Was this plan, this vision, sat and still sits within the Hopi tribal government environment and planning documents. A lot of investment was made by the Hopi tribe in the past in this. And so when I initiated it, it wasn't, I still saw it as a tribal thing. I didn't work for the tribe. I was just a volunteer at that point, a real committed, passionate community member. So when I brought Marissa to the table and a few others, the first person that was also there was the director of cultural preservation, where this project sits under, because that we knew that we couldn't do it without them, and we shouldn't do it without them. Once again, looking at community as we're all in this together, we're all doing this for each other. Yeah, you work for the government, and yeah, you might be from a village, but we should all be thinking about how we can do this together. So that was key, and part of these early years was building a relationship with the Cultural Preservation Office as as just volunteers and committed people from the community on a project. And it took a long time. That probably took the longest, but that's so important to building that relationship and building some level of trust and showing, I guess, and demonstrating that we're committed. And we have a standing joke with Lee all the time, who's the director, that I said, Lee, I'm nudging you now. I'm starting to bang him with my elbows to his side, saying, remember, because I've been talking about this since then, but I mean, since I was still those plans in '94. And every time I'd see him, I'd mention it. But now I'm really going to start, really pushing you. And so we have a joke that my bony elbows are coming into our good asset right now, because it's, that's what you have to do. You have to kind of just be there all the time and talk about it, be in your face, but also do some of the work that should be probably done by, and I guess in some ways it could have been done by people of his office, but they're overwhelmed. They're just overworked. Just have too much on their plate, and I knew they couldn't commit the time that this needed to get done. So we built this relationship and partnership with him from that very beginning, and that's where we still see this as a partnership with the tribe.
Let's talk about you mentioned when you all as a group, a working group, and now you're going to have active board members and perhaps an advisory board. When you make that decision to go down the nonprofit road, what are the pros and cons versus, there's different mechanisms that this institution can become a reality through. One is the nonprofit realm. Again, you mentioned early on, one can be a formal tribal program that's under the tribal government, whether it's through 638 contracts or some other, federal mechanism that helps us move along. What are some of the obstacles or issues that you had to deal with in terms of, okay, we're going to go ahead and move forward as a nonprofit? What was the ultimate impetus to say that would be most beneficial for us right now? And either one of you can answer to that.
I think I always knew it should be a nonprofit. I mean, and I was probably advocating for that it really does need to be separate, connected, but separate. And so I was very clear and transparent on that. It wasn't an issue for me. And Marissa comes from the nonprofit field, and I'll let her share her answer. But there's just so much experience in any tribal community about how tribal government is really hard to work with. And sustainability is one, financial sustainability is one piece of that, but just the bureaucratic nature of a tribal government, trying to write grants and funnel money through, it's just difficult. It's just hard. And I'm not saying that's a great excuse, but I also don't, to me, this is my personal opinion, it's just that the tribal government really is not set up to support that type of work as well. They do some of it, but it's just not designed for that as well. So it just makes it harder. We had conversations with everyone around the table, and everyone just very clear that there was really no argument, in my opinion. But Marissa could share more about what she remembers. But I remember it was really not a question.
Well, we had those kind of inklings early on, but we also did our due diligence through research. We talked with other. I have my connections in the nonprofit arena of founders of tribal museums, and they told me their opinions about that, and a lot of the tribes that decided to go that route in terms of developing their own museums went the nonprofit route for that very reason that Susan stated, because of tribal politics, and they wanted this institution to be owned and built by the community for the community. So that real strong, empowerment from the community saying, this is our institution, we want it, what we feel like we need it for, and we want it to be built around those needs. So it was really community driven, in the sense that was going to be the best way to meet the needs of the community. So so we did the nonprofit research. We also did look at the various types that they incorporated. So as a straight up 501c3 or a 7871, recognizing in the philanthropic arena, working with mainstream funders, they primarily recognize 501c3s. Then they're not too familiar with 7871 structures, which are actually only available to tribal governments to be able to establish their own foundations or nonprofits. And so they're not familiar with that structure, so they don't fund them. And so that was a challenge for some of the museums that did go that route, is to be able to receive the same kind of funding that a 501c3 would. And so that's what kind of made our final decisions. We're lucky to be able to take advantage of was it UCLA?
Yeah, we had connections with UCLA Tribal Law Clinic, who did a lot of research for us. They're great. That's a great asset for anyone, is tap the tribal law clinics, because part of their classes include doing research for tribal communities. Yes. So I had a connection with the job I had before that connected us to UCLA's law clinic.
So they did all the groundwork for us in terms of researching that and the pros and cons of incorporating through each route, and did a public presentation to our community, which we're always looking at ways that we can give back in this project to our community. So the research that that they conducted for us, we held a community event for people to come learn and understand the difference between 501c3 and 7871s and how well that's been working for tribes, for anyone that's interested in incorporating for whatever. And so that was our contribution back to our own community, to educate them about that and our findings as well. So it's been really helpful to do that kind of research and to get the guidance we have from the experts that have already journeyed this for themselves. And it was really, I think, a breaking point for us when we were able to get consensus with the Cultural Preservation Office that this was the best route. Because of they've seen how they have direct impact of leadership at the governance level, and how they're not haven't been showing much support around building this facility, and right now don't have the financial means to do that. And so we figured this would be our way of being able to support that need in terms of on the tribal end, where they don't have the assets to build something like this. And so that would be the nonprofit's contribution to that.
I think we have to bring ourselves out of, sometimes we get, with any project, and any project with culture is also just can be hugely political in itself, but kind of taking that context out of it and just looking at the vehicles, of and means that we have, as any community does. And we've already recognized that the Hopi tribe, has limited financial resources, or, has issues with that part of it. How else can we bring assets and financial means to the community? So it's not really about the tribe is better, or but it's just looking at the tools and vehicles. And so nonprofit, what do you call it? Nonprofit infrastructure and tools are the way to do that. You can set up these organizations that help. That's what they help do is field and bring and connect. Give a vehicle for people who wish to contribute in different types of ways to any kind of project. So just looking at that in itself is I think taking yourself out of the big picture and just looking at vehicles is kind of huge. And some of the early grad work I did too was looking at different tribal structures. Like there's several different tribes who created a museum as a tribal program, interviewing them, like what was that like, and how are you still sustainable, how have you been able to grow, and then all the way out to what we're thinking of now. And then we have a great organization in our community, the Hopi Education Endowment Fund, who is structured as a 7871. So we visited them and talked to them about their challenges as part of our decision making, and they help provide insight for us. So just looking around you and learning from others, that's how we were able to get to where we're at now as well.
So a big question people probably ask in your early presentations, how much is this going to cost? What are your ideas about that? And I know it's an unknown number maybe at this point based on some of those early projections? When you talked about finding museum plans, was there a dollar amount already associated with those plans that you discovered?
There was some early dollar amounts, and this is probably the 80s, when mid to late 80s, when they were finalized. And I can't remember if there's a whole housing element that was actually designed as part of it, and I can't remember the housing part of it was included, but some of the early numbers in the 80s were 11 to 15 million for that plan at that time. We are 30, almost 40 years since that point, and we have another team member who's a architect and did some early estimates. Just looking at the same square footage and the same blueprint of that time, and looking at the costs to build, and we don't quite know what it was going to be built from, so these are just really early estimates. It's jumped up to easily something like 40 plus million if we were to build that particular structure. So we're looking at a large amount of money, but we also recognize that we probably can't build all that at one time. So it's really they give you really good, it's a lesson in humility of what you're really dealing with. And then it brings you back, to some degree, a project manager on this is like, okay, what's feasible and what's doable, because, we don't have 40 million floating around right now. So where do we start with? And so we haven't even gotten to like the real projections of our project yet. We're really just trying to build a team and find a location. The land site, because we really can't design anything until you have a piece of land to design around. But yes, those are the early projections.
Yeah, what about site location? I know there have been several offers in the past from different communities out here at Hopi, but also off reservation. Are those still kind of in contention, so to speak? And I know that's still probably down the line somewhere, many, many years, perhaps, hopefully not too far down the line. But I think it sounds like this is hopefully going to be something that's based on the Hopi Reservation first and foremost. And you talked about we can't build it all at once, so maybe like a repository for actual curated items partially located here on the reservation or somewhere else.
Yeah, we don't. Right now, it's everything under the sun and all those great ideas everybody has. About a year ago, before we even get to that point, because it has to, what I'm going to share has to do with even that question, is we built continual partnerships with the Cultural Preservation Office and built a great alliance with the Hopi Land Commission, which is a subset of the council that deals with certain issues, land being one of them. And they've always been a champion of this project, and we've been consistently meeting with them over the course of these years. And so last year, the director of the Cultural Preservation Office, Lee, suggested it was time to now present this to the full council and get some support. And so a resolution was drafted and submitted last fall to the council, and they approved this with some money to support it. And some of that money included hiring 2 project staff, and they sit under the Cultural Preservation Office and support the project from that perspective. So they are the ones, actually, one of the first things they're doing is that those 2 project staff are now researching all those land offers, because they were given, even though years ago, they're still on the table formally. So there's about 2 definite land offers we know of that were permanently given in the past as part of the project development of this. And then there's been maybe 2 or 3 others that are possibilities but not formally given, but they're interested, and we haven't gone down that path. And then there's other ideas that have come out since then. So we're right in the middle of doing, getting a sense of where we are with those and where we might go, and we don't know the answer to that yet.
Yeah, we're right in the middle of looking at our own feasibility, in terms of what lands are being offered, but also knowing exactly what we're going to be asking for in terms of the land space, its use, and then also taking a look at what kind of what do you call that? The word just left my mind. Infrastructure we're going to have to build there. Water supply, all of that. So that's Eddie Kalnantua has been our team member for a while now, and he's architect, so he's the one that's taking us through. We've been pushing him to take us through this process of having answering some of those questions. What would be the best option for us in terms of land, knowing this is what we're wanting. And we have developed a draft blueprint already, but what we're wanting to do is layer that blueprint, which is incorporated of all of the ideas that we've proposed as a team, and then layering that on top of the old plans to see what we could still make use of from the old plans, and then developing a plan from that. That should be our guide to helping us make decisions around land. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. We're just waiting to go through that process, and then also continuing to strengthen that relationship with the tribe, because they're the ones that are going to be the naysayers or yaysayers in terms of moving it forward too. Thankfully, we have, what do you call that? We've gotten their approval to continue to work on this project, but you never know if that's going to change in terms of the landscape, because we're coming upon a new election. So it's like we have to continuously work on that relationship at the tribal level to continue to support this project. So, there's a lot of moving pieces, I think, where we're at right now. So it's just staying consistent, with those relationships and continuing to further that, and keeping them aware of where we're at in the moving pieces. And so that's really, I think, where a lot of our energy is going into right now. We've just got news on our incorporation.
We filed our incorporation papers about a month ago, and we've received official designation from the state of Arizona that we're incorporated. So we're now in the process of filing our 501c3 application with the IRS. So the Hopi tribe, when they sanctioned us last fall, this project, I guess the other point I should make before that is that we had been working as a community team up to that point. We're still grassroots. We don't have any titles. We don't have any money. We just have this great idea and passion to keep going. And we realized that at some point we can't operate that way anymore. We can only get so far. And it takes resources, it takes money, it takes commitment more than we were giving. And if we were going to be a true partner with the tribe needed to be a formal partner. And so part of this decision to present this project to the tribe was to get that formal partnership and from them. And so the resolution that was passed designated this as a formal tribal project again. And it created a task team, of which a lot of us who were community members and volunteers on this were designated. It gave us a small budget to hire some staff, and it also recognized it directed the Culture Preservation Office as the program of the tribe who's going to be working on this from the tribal side to create this nonprofit, this new nonprofit. So we were already planning on doing that. That was the path, but we educated them on the fact that this is how it should proceed, and so they sanctioned that whole initiative. And so we're on the track to making that part happen. And so yeah, you're right. We're just every time we see a council member, every time we see the chairman, I'm like throwing a little few bits of where we're at with the project, and we can't just rely on the project staff to do that for us. All of us are lobbyists. All of us are ambassadors of this project.
Okay, cool. Well, I think we'll go ahead and take our next break. So we'll do that right now. The rest of you keep listening, and we'll be right back when we return with Susan and Marissa.
Interested in archaeology? Want to hear from experts in the field about the latest discoveries and interpretations? Check out the Archaeology Show every other Saturday and let hosts Chris Webster and April Camp Whitaker take you deeper into the story. Check out the Archaeology Show at www.arcpodnet.com/archaeology and subscribe, rate, and comment on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and the Google Music Store. That's www.arcpodnet.com/archaeology. Now back to the show.
All right, welcome back. Here we are with Susan and Marissa again. Let's go ahead and continue on with the interview.
Yeah, we're relatively young people in the community, and so that we have that working against us sometimes. We're both female. We haven't quit yet, So I think so. It comes out in different ways, and I think I remember when Marissa, one of the first few conversations we had with Marissa, I was sharing with her, what we were trying to do and what I was trying to restart, and she said, well, I said, we're trying to build a museum. I said something like that, and she said, well, we need to build relationships. And I was like, build relationships? We're just trying to build a museum. Not realizing, and she was way ahead of me on that, years later, that's what this is all about, is building relationship with people and building that trust. And that's all I've been doing. We're doing actual stuff, but it hinges on that relationship. So I think how people treat us and begin to, or treat me, at least as a woman, as a young person, is defined a lot on that relationship. So it took a long time for me to really, I maybe heavily realize I was serious. I just, wasn't going away and was persistent. And building those relationships with the tribal council people and the land commission. And when they change, I find out who they were and start visiting with them. And it just takes time. And they begin to finally believe you and trust you and see who you are, but it doesn't happen immediately. It just, and I didn't really recognize, as when I was launching this thing again, that was why it takes time. And today I recognize that as critical to our success and to how we move forward. So when we bring in a new team member, who are you and what can you do? And we're glad you're here, and inviting them and making sure they're part of the team. And, it's a great, amazing idea that people join because of the idea, but they stay because of how they're nurtured and how we find a connection, or how we help them find the connection to this project. Because it's not always clear what you can do or how you can support, or what you can. So to me, that's part of what I've been able to do is see all these moving pieces, and I see somebody who has maybe a experience in this. I'm like, I got to pull that person in. They need to be. I can see how they can help, but they have to get there. And if they do come, nurturing that and celebrating them and thanking them. And so part of it is team building, and then part of it is relationship outside of that team, because there's other people we have to work with and we want to work with and we want to work well with. And that's all hinges on that relationship that you build. So we recognize, so don't take anything personally, when we hear that, you're a bunch of women doing this and how come you're, whatever it is they hinge their comment on. We recognize that they just don't understand what we're really trying to do and perhaps our role in it. We've gotten comments that we're women and we shouldn't be handling sacred objects or, sacred things from the community. And we're like, we actually probably won't, in our minds, we know we're not going to be doing that part of the work, but that's what they see. So that's a red flag, or just a note to us. Okay, we got to go make sure they understand really where we're at and what we're doing. And we're not even quite there yet. And remember, we have a great culture preservation office team that already does all that. So just, massaging those perspectives, being a good listener and recognizing where we need a lot of work to do. Add to that if you want.
For me, even though I initially stepped into this project, as a staff person of the foundation, a lot of my perspectives and insight has come into play in this project as a community member. And, in terms of addressing the challenges, I just have real deep faith and hope that this, and I look at it as this isn't not only our vision, but it's the vision of our elders. And for me, that's my momentum and my motivation to see this come to fruition. And it's not because of me, and it's not only going to benefit me. I think about those people that it's going to benefit in the future, and I just look at it as my role is just to help facilitate that to happen. I'm not claiming, to take a space of any kind of leadership. It actually doesn't fit in my role as a Corn Clan member. I'm more in the community as a helper, and so if anything, that's my role, is just to help. And so when I look at it from that perspective, as an individual, it helps to keep me in keep things in perspective and do what we do well, which is, as women, we bring people to the table, we feed them, we make sure that they feel welcome, we make sure that their voices are heard, that their ideas are incorporated, and that they feel like they belong, and they become part of that vision. And so that's, to me, I really play on those assets as a woman in this community, and that's really kind of our role. We're nurturers. And so, that's how I look at this project too, in a sense, and, just being smart about that and making sure that we relate to our own people the same way we would relate to them if they came through our front doors, as their uncles, if they're our tajas, or if they're our soos or our guas, whatever role that I see them, that's how I reach out to them first. And not to forget to leave that, I don't leave that behind. And I think that's important in working in your own community, is to address people in that manner first culturally, and then go from there. A lot of the people that are serving in leadership right now in the council, I see them from that perspective, as relatives. And so I know that even though conversations may be hard in those kind of scenarios, but I know I can always walk away and have a different kind of conversation later. So those kind of things are, I think, important to remember when you're working on big projects like this. Is as long as you're keeping that relationship good, and a community level, people will come to the table and will overcome their own nuances, that come into play around, because we all have our own opinions about things, but let's talk about it, let's learn more about it, and let's come to a consensus around how we can support one another in that, and even though we have our differences. And so, that's kind of the role that I take when it comes to those scenarios, and just kind of keep the team motivated around, if it's not happening now, it's going to happen at some point. We just got to keep working on it and keep massaging, like Susan said, to bring those important stakeholders to the table. So
I recognize that, for the first few years, however many years, I was carrying a lot of that, and then as a team, I was just getting tired and talking about persistence. And I said, I can't lead this anymore that way. I'm getting tired, I'm getting frustrated. And so I learning to step back, and I expressed that at a meeting, and Marissa stepped up and others stepped up and said, okay, we're going to do so. You lead, at least the team meetings and those kinds of things. So just recognizing when you're tired, or when when you need help, and calling and allowing others to step forward, it's huge. And we're in this for the long haul. And we have a great team now that I can just be real frank, like, I don't know how much more I can do this, guys. I need help. So we need an energy session to, so it's quite draining at times, but there's other times where it's just amazing that you're like, yeah, we finally reached a certain point, but it takes time. All this takes time.
What is on the horizon for this process and the group? What are some goals that you have achieved? You mentioned filing your 501 nonprofit status paperwork and having that approved. You mentioned getting formal tribal resolution. You mentioned working through and developing a lot of personal and professional relationships. So where does this momentum take you now? What's going to get you over the next hump? And so what are your hopes in the next year or so that you are able to kind of place as milestones?
We, the Hopi tribe, granted the resolution, or the funding for the resolution, was only for 1 year. And that ends here in another month and a half, late September, I believe. So the horizon, the next immediate, goal is to submit another request to keep them, to ask them to fund the project at least another year. That would be, so we have to demonstrate what we've done up to this point. That's probably an immediate goal for us. We mentioned that we are in the process of submitting the 501c3 application, and I don't know how long that'll take. I've heard anywhere from 4 months to 2 years, depending on your application, depending on your process. So that's so right now we have voted for a board to be the founding board for this new nonprofit. We had to do that as part of the application process. And so we're really in the process of just this board exactly, which Marissa and I are both on, are now beginning to become a lot more formal. We've already been meeting, but we want to begin to draft some, early policy, or we have to still finish our bylaws and then start looking at early policy and begin laying the organizational infrastructure for this nonprofit organization. That's probably our goal, at least the board members' goal. And then if the Hopi tribe refunds the project, we hope the project staff, we can, they'll fund similarly the project staff to help us move it forward for the planning, all the architectural planning. And is another goal is to get a sense of what kind of footprint, the size of it we're looking at, and some of the initial phases that we're looking at developing, and then securing a land site in another, hopefully another year or so. Mm-hmm. I mean, those are three huge things. They're all moving at the same time, and we work full time, so we can't be involved in all those conversations. So that's why the project staff is really key to keeping those pieces moving. I don't know. Those is probably next. I can only see about a year ahead.
Yeah, strategic planning is on our agenda to help, develop timelines around those moving pieces, but also to look to the future, in terms of how we want to start approaching fundraising once we do get our incorporation papers solidified. We already have draft bylaws. It's just going through them and revisiting it and approving that as board. So we were already working on all of this stuff before we even had a board. Point, so
we were drafting things and pulling policies. We were pulling old, PD's position descriptions from organization. We did a lot of research, and all sitting in a file ready for us to start moving on. I think the other big piece that we have to really clarify is, I mentioned earlier that there's always going to be a connection to the Hopi tribe through the Preservation Office on this project, despite it being a nonprofit. So one of the big areas that we hope to focus on within this next year is to define, through a memorandum of understanding or memorandum of agreement, define what that relationship looks like and who will be responsible for what and who's doing what. Because right now we don't have a clear sense of that, and that's what we need to have in place. So, we hold each other accountable for that, those pieces, or that part of whatever we agree to move it forward. Because we don't see the Preservation Office going away. I hope not, because they have a lot of work to do. Mm-hmm. We are not assuming a lot of Preservation Office work unless they wanted to give it to us, and we talk about if and yes and how and when, and so that's a lot of work that needs to happen in this next year.
In addition to that, I just look at it as how we want to share responsibilities, because then we also have our Hopivewat task team members, which is another entity that's separate from the board. So we have two other partners, two entities that we're really wanting to define roles and responsibilities around. Hopefully that's going to happen in our strategic planning session coming up. Another priority that we determined at our last meeting was going back to relationship building. So starting to meet with the villages again, letting them know who we are, having them meet our board members, task team members, and CPO staff, to make sure, that they understand what it is that we're trying to do, and then bring others to the table that's willing to help. So there's a lot of different ways that people can contribute at this point, because it's bigger than us.
Way bigger, yeah.
And so we just keep that door open, for anybody that wants to come to the table and contribute in some way. There's so much work that needs to get done, and so we're just working on what's immediate right now. But yet in the future, we look at developing working groups to help design, help further the design of the museum. And what is it that the community wants? We have some feedback from the past plans, but is that still present today? And how do we want to make sure that that's included? And how is that going to be delivered in the future? So really getting some insight and perspective into that. I'm really excited to seeing how the next couple of years is going to go, and looking forward to that strategic planning, because I think that's going to really help create transparency for all our working groups that we have right now.
Clarity. Yeah.
And some deadlines.
Right.
Well, I want to thank you two for giving of your time today and sharing this process that has many, many moving parts and has been going on for decades now. Any final thoughts before we close out and let you move on for today?
Just thank you for stopping us for a little while and talking about it, because when you're doing any kind of work, you just go, and it's really great to stop and reflect. And we're kind of good at that for a while, and we haven't done that recently, and this is giving me a good reminders of a lot of things of where we've been. And of course, the strategic planning we have coming up also will help us do that, but it's helpful for us to stop a little bit and reflect and share what we've learned. Mm-hmm. And I hope this, at least this far in the game that we've been involved, helps others. It's important to decide on your core value of how you're approaching work. Mm-hmm. And for us, this is for Hopi by Hopi, and we mm-hmm. have enough people committed in our community today to make this happen on our own. And it's not going to happen fast, but it's going to happen right. It's going to happen from that perspective, and we don't know what we're doing, and that's okay, but we're taking the time to figure that out and make sure that we feel good about the decisions we're making, and that's important as we move forward. So I encourage anyone to, if you've been thinking about that thing that you've been waiting for, maybe it's you, maybe you're the one that needs to pick that up and get it going and started and build that team, because there's a lot of work that we need to do in our communities, and it's up to us to do it. We are the ones who are going to make our communities what we want it to be and how we want it to be. So encourage those to, and other tribal communities, to do the same.
Thanks for listening to the Heritage Voices podcast. You can find show notes at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Heritage Voices. Please subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or the Google Music Store. Also, if you like the show, please share with your friends or write us a review. If you have any questions, comments, or show suggestions, please reach out to me at jessica@livingheritageanthropology.org, or you can find me on Facebook through Living Heritage Anthropology or on Twitter @LivingHeritageA. As always, thank you to Lyle Balenquah and Jason Nez for their collaboration on our incredible logo.
This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.